The cruelest heartbreak isn't when someone leaves you. I once heard my grandmother say, it's when they stay long enough to teach you that hope was a mistake. The rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwell estate, turning the city lights beyond the glass into blurry streaks of gold and silver. I stood alone in the dining room, adjusting a candle that had already burned halfway down. The table was set for 2 white plates, crystal glasses, the same navy blue linen napkins Adrian liked, even though he'd never once noticed them. The roast had gone cold almost an hour ago. The mashed potatoes had formed a thin skin on top. The wine sat untouched beside his chair. I glanced at the grandfather clock near the fireplace. 11:43 p.m., 3 hours past the time he promised he would be home again. I should have known better than to believe tonight would be different. The anniversary card rested beside his plate. I had spent 20 minutes choosing the words, then another 10 trying not to sound desperate while writing them. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of waiting for a man who could command an entire city with a single phone call, but somehow never had time for the woman who shared his last name. The distant sound of tires crunching over wet gravel made my heart jump. For a moment, hope flickered inside me despite everything. Headlights swept across the room. A car door closed. Voices echoed faintly through the front hall. Then the heavy front door opened. Adrian Blackwell stepped inside. Even from across the room, he carried the same presence that made powerful men lower their voices. His charcoal overcoat was damp from the rain. His dark hair was slightly disheveled. Behind him followed 2 of his trusted associates, both discussing business as if it couldn't wait until morning. Adrian handed off a folder without even looking up. "Move the meeting to Friday," he said calmly. "I want updated numbers before noon." Then his eyes finally landed on me. For one brief second, something softened in his expression. Exhaustion, maybe guilt if I was feeling generous, but it vanished almost immediately. "You're still awake?" he asked. I forced a smile. "I was waiting for you." His gaze shifted toward the table, toward the candles, toward the untouched dinner. Understanding crossed his face. "CL." The way he said my name sounded more tired than affectionate. "I know." I folded my hands together to stop them from trembling. "Happy anniversary." Silence settled between us. The rain grew louder. One of the candles flickered. Adrian loosened his tie and exhaled. "I had work?" I nodded. Of course he did. There was always work. Always another meeting. Another problem. Another reason I came second. "I still think love can fix us," I said quietly. The words escaped before I could stop them. For a second, the room became completely still. Then Adrian laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just a short, amused sound. The kind someone makes when hearing a child talk about impossible things. One of the men behind him looked away awkwardly. Adrian shook his head. "Love doesn't fix men like me, Clara." His voice remained calm. Matter of fact, certain it never has. I smiled because I didn't trust myself to do anything else. But somewhere deep inside my chest, something small and fragile finally stopped believing. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the mansion long after Adrian and his associates disappeared into his office. I remained standing beside the dining table, staring at the candlelight dancing across untouched plates. It amazed me how a single laugh could weigh more than 1,000 arguments. No yelling, no cruelty, no dramatic scene, just certainty. The certainty that what mattered most to me meant absolutely nothing to him. I began clearing the table, one plate at a time. The silverware clinked softly against porcelain. Outside, the rain continued falling over the city Adrian controlled. Inside, the silence felt heavier than ever. I carried the food into the kitchen and packed away leftovers that neither of us would eat. 3 years ago, I used to imagine anniversaries differently. Not extravagant gifts, not luxury vacations, just conversation, a shared meal, a reason for him to look at me the way husbands were supposed to look at their wives. The refrigerator door closed with a quiet thud. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the handle. Then I realized something that made my chest ache. I could not remember the last time Adrian had asked me if I was happy. The thought followed me upstairs. The hallway lights glowed softly against dark wood floors. Family portraits lined the walls, carefully arranged by decorators who have been instructed to make the house feel warm. The photograph showed us smiling, elegant, perfect. Strangers would have called us successful. They would have seen wealth, security, and privilege. They would never have noticed how lonely those pictures actually were. As I passed Adrian's office, I heard voices through the partially closed door. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped. Not because I wanted to eavesdrop. As I heard my name. "She still believes people can change," one of the men said. A quiet chuckle followed. Adrian answered. "That is Clara," another voice spoke. "You are lucky. Most women would have left years ago." For a second, I waited. I waited for him to defend me, to say something kind, something that would prove I mattered when I was not in the room. Instead, I heard the scrape of a chair. Then Adrian replied calmly, "She sees the world the way she wishes it was, not the way it is. More laughter. Not cruel, not malicious, just agreement." I stepped away before I could hear anything else. My bare feet carried me down the hallway toward our bedroom. The room felt enormous tonight, Empty, cold. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the rain sliding down the windows. My reflection stared back. 27 years old. Tired eyes. A woman who had spent years trying to love someone into believing he deserved it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from my friend Lily appeared on the screen. How was the anniversary dinner? I looked at the words for several seconds. Then I typed a response. It was only 5 words long. 5 words that felt heavier than anything I had ever written. He came home. I did not. People always assume love begins with a grand moment, a dramatic meeting, perfect first kiss, some unforgettable spark. For me, it started with a man who looked completely lost, standing in the middle of a crowded room. I did not sleep much that night. By 6 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting beside the bedroom window with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching pale sunlight slowly push away the storm clouds. Adrian was asleep beside me. At least I assumed he was. We had become experts at sharing a bed without sharing much else. My eyes drifted toward him. His face looked different when he slept. Younger, somehow less guarded. The sharp edges softened. The constant tension disappeared. It reminded me of the first time I met him 4 years ago. Back then, everyone saw Adrian Blackwell as a powerful businessman with endless influence and endless confidence. They saw expensive suits, private security, and magazine headlines. I saw something else. I saw a man standing alone at a charity fundraiser while everyone else laughed and socialized around him. He had looked uncomfortable, almost trapped. I remembered carrying a tray of sparkling water through the ballroom when I noticed him staring out a window instead of speaking to guests. Most women were trying to get his attention. I was trying to avoid dropping a glass. Somehow I ended up standing beside him. "You look like you would rather be anywhere else," I told him. He glanced at me with visible surprise. "That obvious? Only to someone who also does not want to be here." For the first time, he smiled. Not the controlled smile cameras captured. A real one, small, honest human. We talked for 20 minutes that night, then 40, then an hour. Nothing important. Favorite books, terrible coffee, places we wanted to visit someday. When the event ended, I realized something strange. Adrian listened. Really listened. Most powerful men waited for their turn to speak. Adrian paid attention. At least back then he did. The memory made my chest ache. I stood quietly and walked downstairs. The mansion was still asleep. Morning light spilled across marble floors. I moved toward the sunroom, my favorite place in the house. Plants lined the windows. A small bookshelf stood in the corner. Everything in that room existed because I had created it. A tiny piece of warmth inside a world built on control. I poured myself coffee and settled into a chair. My gaze landed on a framed photograph sitting beside the bookshelf. It had been taken during our first year of marriage. We were standing on a dock in Maine, wind blowing through our hair, smiling into the camera, looking happy, looking hopeful. I picked up the frame and traced the edge with my thumb. Sometimes I wondered if that version of Adrian had been real, or if I had simply fallen in love with a man who only existed for a little while. Upstairs I heard footsteps. Slow, familiar. Adrian appeared in the doorway a minute later. His tie was already in place, his phone already in his hand, ready to leave, ready for another day. His eyes briefly met mine before dropping to the photograph I was holding. For a second, something unreadable crossed his face. Then the moment vanished. "I have meetings," he said. I nodded. He hesitated near the door, just long enough to make me think he might say something more. Instead, he simply turned away. And as I watched him leave, I realized the most painful part was not that he had changed. It was that I still loved the man I kept hoping would come back. The decision did not arrive like a thunderstorm. It arrived like winter. Quietly, gradually, 1 cold degree at a time until I realized everything inside me had frozen. 3 days passed after our anniversary. 3 days of polite conversations. 3 days of shared breakfasts that felt like business meetings. 3 days of watching Adrian move through the house like a man who owned everything except the one thing standing right in front of him. On the 4th morning, I woke before sunrise. The mansion was silent. A pale blue glow stretched across the horizon beyond the windows. For a long moment, I lay still beside him. Adrian was asleep again, one arm resting across the blanket, his breathing steady, peaceful. Looking at him hurt more than it should have, because I still loved him. That was the problem. Leaving would have been easier if I hated him. I sat up slowly and looked around the room that had been mine for 3 years. The photographs, the books, the flowers I replaced every week because nobody else noticed when they wilted. So many little pieces of myself scattered through a house that never truly felt like home. I walked into the closet and pulled out a small suitcase. Not the large designer luggage, just a simple one, the kind people used when they were not planning to come back. By 7 o'clock, the suitcase was packed. I stood in the center of the bedroom staring at it, waiting for panic, waiting for doubt. Instead, all I felt was exhaustion. Downstairs. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen counters. I brewed coffee one final time. The familiar aroma filled the room. I carried a mug to the sunroom and sat in my favorite chair. The same chair where I had spent countless mornings hoping today would be different. The same chair where I had defended Adrian to friends who could not understand why I stayed. The same chair where I had convinced myself that patience was stronger than loneliness. My gaze landed on the wedding ring resting on my finger. Slowly, I twisted it free. The pale mark it left behind surprised me. 3 years of wearing it every day. 3 years of believing it meant we were building something together. I placed the ring carefully into my pocket and returned upstairs. Adrian's office door was open, empty, quiet, organized, everything exactly where he liked it. My eyes found the book sitting on the corner of his desk. The old hardcover novel I had given him during our first Christmas together. He never read it. At least I thought he never had. I opened the cover anyway. The dedication was still there. To Adrian, for the man who deserves happiness, even when he does not believe it himself. Love, Clara. My throat tightened. Then I placed the wedding ring on top of the page. Beside it, I left a small note. Just one sentence. No accusations, no dramatic farewell, no attempt to make him feel guilty. I had spent years explaining my heart. He already knew. The note read, I hope one day you find something you do not laugh at. I stared at the words for several seconds before turning away. The front door felt heavier than usual when I opened it. Cool morning air brushed against my face. Somewhere in the distance, the city was waking up. Cars moved along wet streets. People started their day. Life continued. My hand lingered on the door handle for one final moment. Then I stepped outside, and for the first time in years, I walked away without looking back. You never notice how much space one person fills until they are gone. Adrian discovered that on a Tuesday morning. He returned home just after 8 o'clock carrying a folder filled with contracts and numbers he would not remember an hour later. The mansion looked exactly the same. The marble floors still shined. The staff still moved quietly through the hallways. The city still waited for his decisions. Nothing had changed. At least that was what he thought until he stepped into the kitchen and found an empty coffee station. Clara always prepared fresh coffee before sunrise. Not because anyone asked her to, because she liked the ritual, because she believed small acts of care mattered. Adrian stared at the untouched machine for several seconds before turning away. By noon, he was sitting at the head of a conference table surrounded by advisors discussing investments, properties, and expansion plans. Voices filled the room. Charts appeared on screens. Millions of dollars moved with a few signatures. Normally, he excelled at this. Today, every conversation felt distant, meaningless. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Emails, updates, requests, none of them were from Clara. Around 3 o'clock, he returned to the estate between meetings. An unusual decision for him. Even he did not understand why he drove home. The moment he entered the foyer, something felt wrong. The silence, the absence. The house no longer felt warm. It felt staged, like a luxury hotel pretending to be a home. Adrienne walked toward the sunroom almost automatically. Sunlight spilled across the floor. Clara's favorite chair sat beside the window exactly where she had left it. A half-finished novel remained on the side table. A pressed flower rested between its pages. He picked up the book without thinking, then put it down again. The room suddenly felt difficult to breathe in. That evening, one of the housekeepers approached him carefully during dinner. "Would you like your meal served in the dining room, sir?" Adrienne looked up. "The dining room? The anniversary dinner?" Clara standing beside candlelight. Clara smiling after he laughed. For the first time, discomfort twisted inside his chest. "No," he answered. "I am not hungry." But hunger was not the problem. He spent the rest of the night moving from room to room. Everywhere he looked, Claire existed. The plant she cared for, the photograph she chose, the book she recommended, the blanket she left folded across couches, tiny traces of a woman who had quietly woven herself into every corner of his life. Near midnight, he entered his office. Work usually helped. Numbers made sense. Business made sense. Control made sense. His eyes landed on the novel sitting on the corner of his desk, the same novel Clara had gifted him years ago. Something about it seemed different. He stepped closer. Then he saw it. The wedding ring resting on top of an open page. Gold catching the light from his desk lamp. Beneath it lay a folded note. Adrienne's heartbeat slowed. The room felt strangely still as he picked up the paper. His eyes moved across the familiar handwriting. One sentence, that was all. "I hope one day you find something you do not laugh at." Adrienne read it once, then again, then a third time. And for the first time since Clara walked out of his life, the silence inside the mansion stopped feeling peaceful. It started feeling unbearable. There are some truths that arrive all at once. Others wait patiently for years, hidden in plain sight until you are finally forced to look at them. 3 nights after finding the ring, Adrian found the journal. He had not been searching for it. At least that was what he told himself. The truth was more complicated. He had begun opening drawers he never touched, looking through shelves he never noticed, following traces of Clara the way a lost man follows distant lights. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning when he entered the sunroom again. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house remained silent except for the grandfather clock somewhere down the hallway. Adrienne stood beside the bookshelf and noticed a small wooden box tucked behind a row of novels. He recognized it immediately. Clara had owned it for years. He remembered seeing her place letters and keepsakes inside. For reasons he could not explain, he pulled it forward. The box was unlocked. Inside were photographs, ticket stubs, birthday cards, and beneath them all, a worn leather journal. Adrienne stared at it for several seconds before opening the cover. The first page was dated nearly 4 years earlier, a month after they met. "I think he is lonelier than anyone realizes." The sentence stopped him. He turned another page, then another. Clara had written about everything. Their first conversations, their late-night walks, the first time he smiled without forcing it, the first time she believed the walls around his heart were beginning to crack. Adrienne sat down slowly. Hours passed without him noticing. Page after page revealed pieces of Clara he had never taken the time to see. There were entries about mornings spent waiting for him to come home. Entries about cancelled dinners, missed vacations, forgotten promises. Yet even then, she defended him. "He is trying." "I know he is. He just does not know how to let people love him." Adrian swallowed hard. His chest felt strangely tight. He continued reading. The handwriting changed over time. The hopeful entries grew shorter. The cheerful observations became quieter, more careful. One passage stopped him completely. "Today he bought me a beautiful necklace. Everyone says I'm lucky. The strange thing is, I would have traded every diamond for one uninterrupted hour of his attention." Adrian closed his eyes. He remembered the necklace. He remembered the price. He remembered believing it would make her happy. He did not remember asking what she actually needed. The clock struck 3 o'clock in the morning. Still, he kept reading. Tears blurred his vision for the first time when he reached an entry written only 2 weeks before she left. "I still love him. That has never been the problem. The problem is that I keep asking my heart to survive on hope alone." His hands trembled slightly as he turned to the final page. The last entry contained only a few lines. No anger, no blame. Somehow that hurt most of all. If he ever reads this, I hope he understands that leaving was not about loving him less. It was about finally loving myself enough to stop disappearing. Beneath that sentence sat one final line. Adrienne read it once, then again, then a third time. "I did not stop loving him. I just stopped surviving it." The journal slipped slightly in his hands as silence filled the room. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwell realized that losing Clara had not happened the day she walked out the door. It had happened slowly, one ignored moment at a time, while he was too busy believing she would never leave. The first real sign of trouble arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after Clara left. Adrian was standing in his office, staring out at the skyline when his head of security entered without knocking. The interruption alone was unusual. The expression on the man's face was worse. "We found her," he said carefully. Adrian's heart reacted before his mind did. 3 simple words. 3 words he had wanted to hear every day since she disappeared.